Revolutions Per Minute is a weekly radio show from the New York City chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. Recorded live at WBAI 99.5 in Brooklyn every Wednesday at 9 p.m. RPM's about doing the work to build a democratic socialist future. Each week, hear the latest news, analysis, and organizing experience from the minds and hearts of activists fighting every day in New York City. Join the movement at socialists.nyc.
A UAW worker on strike at a John Deere facility in Iowa.
You're listening to Revolutions Per Minute live from WBI Studios. We're a socialist radio show and podcast from members of the New York City Democratic Socialists of America. DSA is the largest socialist organization in the United States, with 95,000 members nationwide, and NYC DSA is its biggest chapter. We are run by our 9,000-plus members and organizers who are working together to build democratic socialism in all 5 boroughs. A UAW worker on strike at a John Deere facility in Iowa was killed on the picket lines early this morning. We send our love and solidarity to his loved ones and his 10,000 union brothers and sisters still out there fighting for a dignified life. His sacrifice will not be forgotten. Unionization efforts in the strike wave continue to spread. Amazon workers in Staten Island announced an NLRB petition earlier this week. Thousands of academic workers unionized at the University of Pittsburgh, while thousands more at Harvard today launched a 3-day work stoppage. Columbia academic workers walked out today and are prepared to hit the picket lines next week here in New York. 45,000 healthcare workers at Kaiser Permanente have authorized a strike. NYC DSA members this past weekend stood in solidarity with 2,000 healthcare workers on strike at Catholic Mercy Hospital in Buffalo. We'll hear from Charlie Baker on this struggle in the rally for DSA-endorsed mayoral candidate India Walton. Dozens of DSA candidates are running in races across the country, from Massachusetts to New York to Florida. Jorge from Joel Brooks' campaign in Jersey City joins us to discuss their city council campaign in its final week. We'll also hear a special report from Lee on the victorious struggle led by NYC DSA Eco-Socialist Working Group to prevent a frack gas power plant from being built in Astoria. But first, the headlines.
The City Department of Investigation has released a report accusing Mayor Bill de Blasio of misusing around $320,000 of city funds on travel and security, particularly during his 2020 presidential campaign. This is part of the nearly $1 million the mayor owes to lawyers, campaign consultants, and lobbyists. Governor Kathy Hochul has officially halted the LaGuardia Air Train project and is asking the Port Authority to explore alternatives. De Blasio announced a plan to scrap the city's Gifted and Talented program. Democratic mayoral nominee Eric Adams has said he is not only opposed to getting rid of the program, but would also work to expand it. The City Council is considering passing a bill that would require restaurants to only include plastic cutlery with to-go orders if customers specifically request it. Meanwhile, the ban on plastic straws that passed City Council last May will go into effect on November 1st. More than 200 people who are currently detained at Rikers Island's notorious women's facility will be temporarily transferred to state-run prisons in Westchester in an attempt to reduce the population at the crisis-ridden jail. A Bronx man who had been detained at Rikers died the same day a judge granted an emergency conditional release for him. His is the 13th death at the jail this year and comes one day after a federal monitor reported that the de Blasio administration's interventions have failed to improve the dangerous conditions at Rikers. Senator Chuck Schumer rode along with Los Deliveristas Unidos in Harlem, where the labor group discussed the unsafe working conditions delivery workers face in the city. Public advocate Jumaane Williams joined a rally on Sunday to demand that Senator Schumer live up to progressive policy promises in Washington. Advocates are pushing the Metropolitan Transit Authority to expand the discounts offered to commuter rail passengers for riders within the 5 boroughs. Tenants are feeling the pressure as rents continue to rise to pre-pandemic levels, The Gothamist has reported. New York Attorney General Letitia James's office is investigating an NYPD officer for the off-duty shooting of 2 women in Bensonhurst. In elections news, early voting for the citywide general election began on October 23rd, ahead of Election Day on November 2nd. In the mayoral race, Adams is expected to win a landslide in a city where Democrats outnumber Republicans by around 6-1. Stephen Matteo, the council's Republican minority leader, is facing one of the few competitive races in the election, the Gotham Gazette has reported. Democrat Saul Albanese is contesting the seat, which has been held by the Republicans since 1992. Meanwhile, fundraising group Emily's List is backing Governor Hochul in a key early endorsement for the incumbent. Emily's List decided not to wait for other potential candidates, such as Letitia James, to enter next year's gubernatorial race.
Our headlines are brought to you by The Thorn, an incredible weekly newsletter by New York City DSA's Electoral Working Group that covers local politics and radical activism. You can subscribe for free at thethorn.nyc. So here in the studio, I have Jack and Lee, if you both want to introduce yourselves.
What's good, New York? This is Jack Devine, he, him pronouns, and we've got Lee for a special report. She's just going to be joining us for a moment. Lee, how you doing?
Hey, everyone. I'm Lee. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the sometimes host and general eco-socialist beat reporter for RPM.
Desiree, if you're trying to chime in, I think we've got you muted right now.
Oh, sorry. Hey, Lee. Good to have you back on. Let us know what's going on in the eco-socialist organizing world in New York City.
Yeah, so we had a very huge victory today. The Department of Environmental Conservation announced that they will be denying permits for 2 new frack gas power plants, one in Astoria, Queens, and one a little more upstate, depending on how you define upstate, but up the river on the Hudson in Newburgh. It's called the Dan Scammer frack gas power plant. So both those power plants and DSA eco-socialist groups in both those areas were very involved in those fights, and those were both denied today.
And why was shutting down the new fracked gas power plant so crucial to the eco-socialist movement? What is this fracked gas power plant?
Yeah, so, we banned fracking here in New York, but we are still fracking in Pennsylvania. We've run out of getting easy to get to gas, and now we're blowing apart rocks to get out gas. And so pretty much, fossil fuel capital is just marching forward. And so anytime we actually stop a project from being built, it's an incredible victory. And, in New York City, we found out about the Astoria power plant because of DSA eco-socialists. They were the ones who were living in the community, particularly Queens DSA eco-socialists, and we're like, oh, wow, this huge fossil fuel company, NRG, wants to build a brand new frack gas power plant in a community that already has incredibly high rates of asthma, and reached out to people who have been fighting power plants and fracking for a long time. My day job is with a group called Sane Energy Project. So this has been a huge coalition fighting this. But it also really shows how DSA's organizing, I think, really combines very well with electoral organizing, right? So like Zoran, ran on this issue. And has been an absolutely amazing leader in the fight to try to stop the Astoria power plant, not just, speaking eloquently about it, but his team has put in a lot of hours in organizing, getting postcards sent. Even the same with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's. Her campaign team has done a lot of door knocking on this issue. So I think it shows that when we run candidates, DSA candidates, socialist candidates that are not afraid to take on the fossil fuel industry in a very real and meaningful way, that we can actually stop these projects from being built. And now we need to make sure that we're fighting that money is being spent on renewables, not, more dirty energy.
So, Lee, you're pointing to the fact that this was a massive coalition that came together to fight back against fossil capital, and it seems like we have two dynamics going on at the same moment, where you have a growing eco-socialist movement that is fighting back against fossil capital, but as you mentioned, fossil capital is marching forward, and climate change is increasingly destroying so many people's lives here in New York City and across the world. So, what can the eco-socialist movement do here in New York City and more broadly to build upon this sort of victory?
Yeah, so I mean, we can't just keep spending all of our time fighting the bad. I've been doing that the last 8 years of my life, and we're running out of time. We have to build the good, and that means renewable energy, but that means renewable energy that's actually owned by the people and not owned by Goldman Sachs or NRG or National Grid or Con Edison. So, the eco-socialists are fighting for public power, and that year it looks like making sure we pass the Build Public Renewables Act this year, which would allow an agency that already exists in New York, the New York Power Authority, to start building renewables that are owned by us. So this power plant in Astoria is not going to be built, but let's make sure that we build renewable energy that is owned by us, the people, and that's what we can fight. So make sure you follow the Eco-Socialist on Twitter and all social media. It's a really important fight, and we need all of New York City fighting for this because it really impacts all of us.
Absolutely. The public power campaign is so essential to what NYC DSA is up to, and is really emblematic of the broader socialist program, and that is increasingly and incredibly popular here in New York. And it's just going to take us fighting and pushing back against fossil capital, the broader capitalist class, and their representatives within the state who are holding back popular demands to push things forward like public power. It's going to take organization, and this victory today is a sign that organization, when it's tied together, building coalitions, can really win. Thanks so much for hopping on for a few minutes, Lee. You're listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast app. Today, we are talking about a lot of different issues. The defeat of a planned frack gas power plant in Astoria and further up in Newburgh. And we're going to be hearing from Joel Brooks's campaign, as well as we're going to be hearing from Charlie Baker, who is out in Buffalo standing in solidarity with the nurses on strike up there. But now we're going to turn to the interview we have with Joel Brooks's campaign. Back in July, we visited North New Jersey DSA to meet with Joel Brooks, a socialist and union organizer running for city council in Jersey City's Ward B. For an update on that campaign in its final days, Amy Wilson spoke to North New Jersey's electoral field coordinator, Jorge. Let's roll that clip right now.
My name is Jorge Maldonado. I go by he, him pronouns. I currently live in Jersey City as of a few months ago. I'm a union organizer with New York Nurses. I'm the former chair of our chapter, so I've been in DSA since helping start up an NYU DSA back in 2017. But currently, I am one of our electoral working group field coordinators, alongside with my other field coordinator, Josh Rusinov, and I'm tasked with leading the canvasses, assessing how we're doing in terms of our field coordination, and overall just doing the heart of what a campaign is supposed to do, which is to talk to as many people and inspire them and bring them into action. And, I'm volunteering for Joel Brooks for two main reasons. One, to grow class consciousness in Jersey City's working class, and two, to build working class organization and empower the community. For us to accomplish this in Jersey, though, it's going to require a real left presence. The state of New Jersey, and specifically North Jersey in particular, is very Democratic blue on paper. But the reality is that the Democratic machine here is balkanized across different local machine formations that operate through patronage and political favors. And they are funded by real estate developers and corporations. There have been some progressive challengers, both on a federal and even local level, that have managed to squeak through some elections. But the reality is that the vast majority of left challengers and organizations in the machine have either lost, they don't have a large mass base of working people, or they aren't socialist. So what's that mean for our organizing conditions? It means that the majority of Jersey City's working class does not feel empowered and are disillusioned with the status quo. You can see that most clearly in Jersey City, the state's second biggest city that is majority immigrant. It touts its vibrancy and diversity, yet you are seeing a clear line being drawn between the wealth concentrating in downtown and the communities on the west side that are getting left behind, the communities we're representing in Ward B, where Joel Brooks is running in. This campaign's about inspiring a vision of change that places working people at the center of the stage. I'm volunteering here because I want to propagandize what it means to fight against those that are materially withholding what's going to improve our lives, those that are withholding the kinds of affordable housing regulations, the kind of investment in our public schools, the kind of Green New Deals that we need in our local communities and federally because of private gain. I want to propagandize that vision, and I want to inspire people to join into organizations in a way that they can combat it, going beyond just voting, but participating in their unions and participating in their local tenants unions or forming them where possible. So I'm volunteering because I think the electoral arena is one really important opportunity to reach a mass audience and where we can draw them, inspire them into our vision, and set them into motion to fight for change.
Right on. And we here at Revolutions Per Minute did our part to propagandize back in July when we had Joel and a couple of other awesome comrades from North New Jersey on. They talked a lot about what you just laid out for us there, Jorge, about the conditions of Jersey City. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about what's developed in the campaign since that time, which was mid-July that we...
Right. So I'm pretty proud of how much our campaign has continued to escalate and how much we've built on the already exciting growth that we had in our campaign. For those that don't know, as of Saturday, it's the first time that New Jersey and across the whole state has early voting. So people are voting as we speak, up until 8 o'clock. But starting from Saturday, they can vote up until Sunday, the 31st. There's no voting on Monday. And then on Tuesday, folks can do regular election day. So prior to getting out the early vote, which we started that Saturday, we knocked on 35,411 doors. We made 7,893 calls. We canvassed a total of 5,337 voters, and we identified over 1,300 supporters. So in that time, we've been really busy. But most importantly, we've talked to a lot more people. We've switched over to persuasion, and we've also expanded our volunteer base and developed a lot of new leaders who are leading some of our field campaign, leading some of our comms. Again, the majority of the campaign, as I'm sure was stressed earlier, is led by DSA and some non-DSA volunteers, but people who have some experience and people who are doing this for their first time, and including myself here. We've done a lot of collaborations and dual canvases with New York City. A lot of folks have been coming out, which has been really great to see. This weekend, we had folks from Philadelphia carpool together, come together en masse to support the campaign, folks from Central Jersey and South Jersey. And we've also partnered with some and co-endorsed other local independent voices like Rolando Lavaro and Chris Gatson in Jersey City, who are running for at-large, that are now, we're teaming up with them, combining our volunteer forces. They have a big base in the community. They're fighting to empower working families as well. So all of this has kind of just led to a lot of momentum, a lot more people coming out to canvases, a lot more people sharing our campaign, wanting to learn more about it, a lot more voters wanting to participate. So that's been good. And also to note, we got our first attack mailer, which, it was only a matter of time before it happened. But we got a mailer connecting some tweets from DSA about how DSA is about funding the police. And Joel is funded by DSA is the way they're framing it. And basically we have a neighbor here who's not looking to make the streets safer. He wants to defund the police. Everyone run away. Don't vote for this guy. Very poorly, very lazily done mailer. But we've had a lot of people respond to it by saying, what's with this Fox News tactics you're suddenly bringing up. So we've just rebounded by re-emphasizing sending mailers about our platform and canvassing and talking to more people and telling them what it's about, right? Jersey City, they're not keeping the public safe. Their investment in the police department hasn't made things safer, right? We want to fund our public schools, after school programs, and provide a real vision of keeping people, off the streets, providing alternative opportunities, and also just empowering working people to have more opportunities to participate in everyday life.
You just laid out so many, you hit me with the data and the statistics, and I just want to make sure that our listeners heard that you said that the campaign has knocked on over 35,000 doors. It's incredibly impressive work. So you mentioned that you're a union organizer. Folks who listened to our interview with Joel back in July will also know that he's a union organizer. We're in a time of just increasing labor militancy. Some people are calling this the month of Striketober. So talk to me a little bit about how you bring that experience to your work on the campaign, and more generally, why vote for a union member or a union organizer? What do you bring to public office?
Striketober is my favorite month so far. Nothing gets me more amped up than seeing working class people stand up, organize together, and say that enough is enough. We deserve dignity, we deserve respect, we deserve changes in our lives, and we're going to fight. We're going to do what we can to be able to win it. And I think what that means for electeds is that it gives us a perspective of, one, actually knowing what it means to conduct politics in a real meaningful way. This goes back to a little bit of what we were talking about earlier, where it doesn't feel like the machine itself has been actually engaging with working people, and even some of the other left progressive groups that are doing really amazing work, right? But there are certain skills that it takes to be able to bring people into action that I think union organizers have a lot of experience of. Right, having the one-on-one conversation, being able to identify local leaders, identifying organic leaders, as Jane McLevy likes to call it, bringing people into action, inspiring people, emphasizing the importance of the organization, right? That the only way we're going to win is by having an organization of everyday working people who want to change in their life, and that they are going to be the drivers of what that change is going to look like. So I think union organizers have experience doing this, especially where there's an emphasis on rank and file militancy, right? A belief in a labor movement that's led by workers. Our power ultimately comes from ordinary working people that are being represented by these institutions to participate and to engage in that process.
How can listeners get involved and support your campaign over the finish line?
There's a lot of different ways you can get involved, but the most important way, if you're local, if the listeners here are local, and if you can drive however amount of time to come to our campaign, beyond anything right now, we need folks who want to go talk to Ward B voters, bring our vision to their homes, and bring them into action. You can sign up specifically by going to joelforjc.com. That's one more time. That's joelforjc.com. If you can come out, knock on some doors, that would be amazing.
Well, thank you so much, Jorge, and good luck with this last couple days.
It's really exciting to hear about electoral organizing across the country, even right over the river in New York City. My name's Desiree Joy Frias. You're listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcasting app. Today, we've been talking about our wins in the eco-socialist realm with Lee. We've also just spoken about an electoral race that the Socialists will hopefully win over in Jersey City, the Joel Brooks campaign with North New Jersey DSA. If you want to keep hearing these really great interviews and stories from organizers across the country, we got to raise some money to keep the lights on. So I really hope that you can join Sonia from Jamaica, Queens, and become a BAI Buddy, which is our monthly donation program. You can give as little or as much as you're able to, but there's very few places in the country where this kind of independent reporting, live radio can continue to happen, especially as all of our beloved independent radio stations are being bought up. So we really want to keep this show on the radio, and we want to keep WBAI on 99.5. So we want to make sure that we keep fundraising and asking for your donations if you're able to give to the station. So please, if you can, call 212-209-2950. Again, that phone number is 212-209-2950, or you can go to WBAI.org. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and it's always great. You can come on if you do give a donation on WBAI.org. You can get a shout out, like Sonia from Jamaica. Just wanted to give her a double shout out for her request. And just, if you want to get on the air later, we'll be opening up the phone lines. You'll be able to call in and talk with us about the struggle for socialism here in New York. And this station, WBAI, is so key within that struggle, having a listener-sponsored, listener-funded, democratically run station through listeners and staff. It is just an essential part of New York's socialist kind of ecosystem, and it's something that can grow and grow and grow more powerful. We're getting more and more listeners here on this show and across the network, and we're going to continue to grow the station and our listenership by building and connecting with working class organization. So building more connections with NYC DSA organizers, building more connections with the labor movement. Just a few weeks ago, we had my labor union, PSC, on the radio to discuss a potential strike over a New Deal for CUNY. We're going to continue updating the struggle for a New Deal for CUNY and the kind of bridges that are being built between PSC and WBAI. Because this could become a very, very powerful labor socialist radio. So we're going to continue to update you on all the spheres of struggle that NYC DSA is engaged in, that the labor movement is engaged in, and that WBAI is engaged in against the efforts of capitalist media. We need a socialist media, and WBAI is the kind of perfect place for us to grow that movement and make it the sort of working class media organization that can build and raise the voices of people out there engaged in struggle. So now let's roll to our clip, our interview between me and Charlie Baker on strike solidarity up in Buffalo with the nurses on strike at Catholic Mercy, as well as an update on the India Walton campaign, a democratically socialist endorsed candidate running for mayor in Buffalo. Let's roll that clip.
So we are joined by Charlie Baker, a founding member of Revolutions Per Minute, an active organizer within NYC DSA. Thank you so much for joining us, Charlie.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jack.
Well, so you were up in Buffalo this past weekend where there's a really important strike going on by the CWA nurses. So why were NYC DSA members from New York up there in solidarity with Buffalo striking workers? Why is this such an important fight? And why is it so critical for there to be a connection between the different cities in New York in a broader struggle for socialism?
Yeah, absolutely. So a group of something like 24 NYC DSA members were up in Buffalo this past weekend. Big shout out to Drashti for organizing this amazing trip. Also, big shout out to Buffalo DSA. They were super welcoming to all of us. The main reason we were in Buffalo was to canvass for India Walton, the DSA-endorsed Democratic nominee for mayor of Buffalo. But while we were there, we thought it was really important that we show up to the picket line at Mercy Hospital, where we stood in solidarity with the workers who are on strike there. And as it was explained to us when we arrived, this strike has been going on since October 1st. And when we were there, it was day 23 already. So CWA represents pretty much every non-physician who works in the hospital. So this is nurses, aides, technicians, transport, etc. So pretty much everyone who's not a doctor or a manager at the hospital is on strike. And the biggest issue that prompted this strike is staffing ratios. So basically, there are too many patients for the number of staff. And apparently things have gotten so bad that at one point, one nurse said she was caring for 30 patients at once, when the ideal should be like 4 patients per nurse. And the workers have been trying to talk to the hospital to bring this ratio down for years, but the hospital won't listen. And these are some of the lowest paid healthcare workers in the area. So they could literally make more money by working in another hospital. And for some workers, they could make more by working in a McDonald's. So there's really low wages, terrible working conditions. And as a result, a lot of workers left the job. So the staff to patient ratio is getting even worse. It's a vicious cycle sort of thing. And several of the union hospital workers died from COVID. And instead of responding by improving working conditions, the hospital gave out these like thank you shirts. So just the epitome of a total immaterial empty gesture, a t-shirt, you know. I think we all saw a lot of this kind of thing during the pandemic, this, you know, societal norm of everybody clap for our essential frontline workers. But, you know, what does clapping accomplish? What does a thank you t-shirt accomplish when your coworkers are dying? And in this case, the hospital actually gave out the t-shirts and then supposedly asked workers to pay more for their health insurance. So really, really messed up stuff. And the strikers actually had the t-shirts displayed up on the fence at the picket line to remind everybody, you know, what a joke this was, how management really does not care about them. So as a result of this low pay, bad working conditions, the workers went on strike. And there are picket lines from 5 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. There are 3 picket lines at the hospital proper, and then one in a nearby offsite location as well. And we went to this picket line, you know, to stand in solidarity with the workers. And, you know, on a practical level, what that meant is we were basically marching in 2 big circles to block these 2 driveways on one side of the hospital. It's a huge building, takes up a massive block, multiple entrances on different sides. On our side, this was like the visitors entrance. So the point of a picket line is to block scabs, obviously, but the strikers don't want to prevent anyone from visiting loved ones in the hospital. So, you know, there were some times when a car would come through our entrance and we would see it was someone delivering flowers or that kind of thing. And we would be told, you know, the picket captain would say to everyone, okay, step aside, this car can pass, right? Depending on what the car was, who was in it, right? But a couple of hours later, we left. We were driving around the block. We got a glimpse of what was going on elsewhere at the hospital. We could see the picket lines blocking other driveways where there were a ton of other entrances. You know, there's tons of people out here on strike, showing up every day. And these other sides of the building were not the visitors' entrance. So the strikers elsewhere on the block were apparently a lot stricter, not letting anyone go inside, not letting anyone cross the picket line, because the scabs get brought into these other entrances. They arrive in vans, and the task of the picket line is to prevent the van from going up the driveway and reaching the hospital. Kind of interesting thing that happened while we were there, marching, you know, more and more people were joining, arriving and joining our circle. So the circle kept getting bigger and bigger. As we grew in size, we were getting farther up the driveway, closer to the hospital. And there were these private security guards in front of the entrance. And supposedly they threatened to call the police if we got any closer. So we had to move back down the driveway closer to the street. And the strike captains had to put down, you know, a traffic cone, which was the farthest point up the driveway that we were allowed to walk without getting the cops called on everyone. So that was interesting. And I was talking to the worker I was marching next to. She was telling me all about how there had actually just been this big scandal where the private security guards that the hospital hired during the strike were not licensed in the way they were supposed to be. And this was this big thing that came out in the local news that the hospital was hiring security people who legally shouldn't have been hired. So yeah, a lot of wild stuff going on. I also, I have like the chant sheet, which were all the chants that were being said on the picket line. Are you interested in hearing any of them?
I'm definitely happy to hear a chant, and I think it would be great to have at least one of them broadcasted out on the airwaves.
Let's go. Okay, so these are basically the demands in their most condensed form. We've got, you know, what do we want? Safe staffing. When do we want it now? If we don't get it, shut it down. You know, pretty standard protest chant focused on, in this case, safe staffing. We've also got, you know, hey, hey, ho, ho, corporate greed has got to go. Get up, get down. Buffalo's a union town. Everywhere we go, people want to know who we are. So we tell them we are the union, the mighty, mighty union, fighting for patients and a fair contract. Safe staffing saves lives. You know, this safe staffing saves lives. This was the slogan that was written on all the signs we were holding while we were marching. We've also got 1, we are the union. 2, a little bit louder. 3, we want justice for our patients. So, you know, this is about better working conditions, right? But the union is also doing this really effective reframing of the issue and saying, this is about workers, yes, but it's also about what's best for patients, because this is a very specific kind of workplace. This is a hospital, and there are life and death consequences for patients when workers are overburdened and treated badly by management. You know, some of the chants even have like specific demands for the workplace, like, I don't know what you've been told, no breaks, no lunches, it's getting old. I'll stop reading, you know, the chants. There's a ton of them, but here's one more. It's particularly interesting, which is, who let the scabs out? Huff, 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 huff. So I had to look this up, but this chant is referring to this like scab company called Huffmaster. Their tagline is keeping business in business. It's this company hires scabs. They put up job listings when there's a strike to hire non-union workers to break the strike. If you go on their website, stuff you read there is just like classically gross anti-union stuff. There's a quote, from our founding in 1963 as a private detective agency in Dearborn, Michigan, 3 generations of the Huffmaster family have built the company into the leading provider of strike management and security services. So like pretty serious Pinkerton vibes going on here, very evil stuff. It's a company that exists basically for the sole purpose of breaking strikes, making money by preventing union workers from using collective action to demand better workplace conditions. And what I was talking about earlier with the unlicensed security guards, that's referring to Huffmaster. Today I was reading this local news article, and it was saying, quote, State Attorney General Letitia James wants Catholic Health and Huffmaster to remove those security guards from Mercy. And in a formal cease and desist letter to Huffmaster, the Attorney General's Labor Bureau Chief says they are operating without a required state license, both as an employment contractor and with the security detail, end quote. So this is what's going on. The hospital's doing a lot of shady stuff to break this strike. There are quite a lot of strikes happening in the U.S. right now, and the local labor context in Buffalo is really interesting. This isn't the only thing that's happening here. There's this strike at the hospital, but there's also a unionization effort at the 3 Starbucks locations in Buffalo. There's something like 9,000 Starbucks locations in the U.S., but if this unionization effort is successful, these ones in Buffalo would be the very first Starbucks in the country to unionize. So there's quite a lot of exciting labor activity going on in Buffalo right now. The labor movement's on the march in this Rust Belt city, and we should all definitely keep an eye on what's going on with the Starbucks unionization effort and with the CWA workers on strike at Mercy Hospital. Here's hoping they get the contract they deserve. If you're up in Buffalo, make sure you join them on the picket line and stand in solidarity.
Well, I think you won your performance with this chance was very, very impressive. So I just want to point that out.
Thank you, sir.
Of course. I just also want to kind of highlight the 3 critical things that you're really hitting on, which is one, the absurdity of this capitalist funded healthcare system and capitalist owned healthcare system, where you have these ridiculous worker to patient ratios that kill people constantly. And that it's the organized institutions of the working class that are fighting back for this. You have the CWA nurses and technicians and all the other workers of the hospitals. They're the ones taking the stand for a humane healthcare system. And they're fighting in this particular instance while you have this healthcare company basically hiring goons to fight back against the people who spend all of their time and effort and labor saving people's lives. So I think, you are, and it's incredibly important to have, socialist organization combining with other working class organization. And that's what you and other members of NYC DSA were doing this past weekend. And very encouragingly, the NYC DSA elected officials were up there, I believe the weekend before that, also standing in solidarity. So we've had a lot of solidarity through socialist and working class organization that has been very, very impressive. And that's what's going to transform things here, is building this bigger movement with organization and with organization of people who are willing to fight for and stand by other people. And hopefully we use this power to get something like the New York Health Act passed here in New York, or Medicare for all across the country, so we can really, challenge the power from below and above of the healthcare industry and have a healthcare system that works for all people. And speaking of trying to fight for a system that works for all people, you were also up in Buffalo, as you mentioned before, for Democratic Socialists, India Walton, who's running for mayor there, and who was also, representing the Starbucks unionization effort by bringing them on stage, the struggle that you referenced before. So what do you think a India Walton mayoral victory would represent, and what would it mean for the working people of Buffalo and really for the Democratic Socialist movement more broadly?
Right. I mean, it would be a massive sea change in, the way politics is done in Buffalo, but also just it would send a signal across New York State and across the country. I believe if she gets elected, she'll be, it'll be a historic victory of having a mayor of a mid-sized city like this. And yeah, as you were saying, at her campaign rally, she actually brought the Starbucks organizing folks that, the folks leading the unionization effort at the 3 Starbucks in Buffalo, she brought them on stage, at her campaign rally. And, who else is doing that, right? Like that's so amazing to fold labor, organized labor into an electoral campaign like that, right? Like that's what it should be about. That's what an electoral campaign should be. And maybe not everybody in the theater where this rally was happening knew beforehand that there was this, huge thing going on right in their backyard and in the Starbucks where they, go get their coffee every day, right? You don't necessarily know, that this is happening. And everyone in the theater was super, in support. They were really there, amped about India and super amped up to learn about this unionization effort as well. There was also another union, present, speaking at the rally. There were people like, Cynthia Nixon, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This is a really, really big thing that's going on. This is like all eyes are on Buffalo right now, because it would be a huge, huge shock, to the establishment system, if and when, hopefully when, India wins this race.
Yeah, I think it would be a major victory for the Democratic Socialist movement, just as the City Council endorsed NYC DSA City Council endorsed candidates we have running here in New York City, just like all these other candidates that are running across the country. And as you mentioned before, labor activity is on the rise. So the combination of this labor action, more broadly working class organization that's developing, combined with a political program that is being pushed forward by these politicians, brings a lot of hope, but also power to working people. So thank you so much for joining us on Revolutions Per Minute, Charlie. We're always happy to have you back, especially since you are one of our founding members.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks so much for having me back.
You're listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast app. We have about 15 minutes left of the show, so at this time we'd love for you to call in and talk to us. Please give us a call at 212-209-2877. Again, that number is 212-209-2877. 77. So Desiree, we were just hearing Charlie talk about his role in strike solidarity up in Buffalo for the healthcare workers that are on strike up there, and you were so heavily involved in organizing strike solidarity back in January when the Teamsters went on strike here in the Bronx. So why is it so important for DSA to be on the picket lines with striking workers, and what sort of strategies are crucial and sort of activities can DSA members who are not within the union do to support striking workers?
Yeah, so I'm really proud of all of my comrades that took the long drive up to Buffalo this last weekend, especially Jasmine and Ziggy here from the Bronx Upper Manhattan branch. I really do believe that India Walton's going to win this election. It's not if, but when. But that doesn't just come to fruition by itself. It comes because our comrades across the country stand shoulder to shoulder with workers that are striking, knock on doors for electoral campaigns, fight like Lee does against these fracking institutions. It's because DSA members put in the work. So in January, I was really proud to help set up the strike kitchen outside of the Hunts Point Terminal Market, because, the bosses have the money, but we have people. And I think that it's incredible that DSA members are willing to put their physical bodies on the line through direct action, through strike support, to really provide this tangible form of solidarity, whether you're cooking a meal for someone who's striking or stoking the fire pits that we had to keep them warm in January in New York City when they were outside for 16, 20 hours. Enabling a worker to stay on strike just an hour more in any way that you can helps them win the victory against the bosses. People in DSA, I feel like, I don't have money. I don't have X. You have your body, and putting your body out there on the line, shoulder to shoulder with these workers, really does make the change. So I hope that some of my comrades here in New York City will continue to join our taxi workers downtown, continue to join Amazon workers on Staten Island, continue to join these fights across the country, because it's making real lasting change in the way that workers treat us. And, you may not work for Amazon, you may not work for the Hunts Point Terminal Market, but you better believe that the bosses see the work that we're doing, and they're going to have to learn.
I think that's a great point. They're going to have to learn, or maybe the workers can finally take away the power of the bosses. And I just want to remind our listeners that the phone lines are open, so you can give us a call at 212-209-2877. Again, that number is 212-209-2877. And Desiree, just to respond, I think you highlighted a few very critical things, is that, one, just putting your body on the line, standing in solidarity, can make people believe in a different world if someone comes out and fights alongside you and is willing to commit to something that they start to realize is about themselves, but also about other people, that it's a broader and more comprehensive fight. And that, someone like you going out there and distributing food to striking workers who are, fighting so they can have a dignified life, so they can eat, so they can, have a good meal, somewhere to live, somewhere to have a good place for their kids to go to school, that this is kind of a basic struggle that unites the vast majority of people in this country, in this city, and around the world. So I think, you're really pointing to something that is so critical to understanding how you actually fight for socialism. So I just want to remind our listeners again that the phone lines are open at 212-209-2877. Again, that number is 212-209-2877. So Desiree, do you have any questions that you have for me, or maybe you want to direct at the listeners as they want to call in?
Yeah, I want to hear from the listeners. What does Striketober mean for you? Are you part of the Great Resignation of 2021? Is there things on your job that you're just not putting up with anymore? And if you're a union worker like you are, Jack, put this into perspective. Talk a little bit about Striketober, what it means to you, and where we are in the moment across the country.
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing a kind of a growing and more powerful movement that's demonstrating itself out in the streets. And I think we don't want to date this back to just this month or even this year, but things have been happening in the labor movement, especially since the Red for Ed movement, which is dating back to 2018, where teachers increasingly started to withhold their labor, hit the streets with political demands, and organize alongside parents and students and other working class organizations. And we can really kind of date that movement not further back to 2012, when the Chicago teachers made a very, very powerful demonstration of their power by hitting the streets with political demands to fight for their students. And they did it again in 2019. And we've been seeing the education labor movement really throw itself into a kind of broader program. And I think what we're hopefully going to see here more and more in New York City is, for example, we've been talking about PSC, and there's definitely a movement in PSC to get out and demonstrate our power and fight for a New Deal for CUNY. Early this week, there was a rally, where there was demands placed against the Board of Trustees, but more broadly pushing for a New Deal for CUNY, which would be tuition-free education for students all across the city, which would mean thousands more jobs, higher pay, more mental health counselors. But this would be part of a broader program. This is something that wouldn't just be PSC, academic workers, the tens of thousands of us, but it could be a broader fight in the public sector here in New York. The movement of rank and file educators here in New York, did an incredible job during the start of the pandemic with wildcat strikes that prevented all these teachers and students being thrown into the wolves during the beginning of the pandemic and had the disease spread. Those wildcat strikes saved thousands. More has been building power, and we'll be hearing from them soon as they continue to fight for more funding or to demonstrate their power alongside CUNY workers. So we're going to continue to hear more and more from education labor and their capacity to strike. Max, do we have anyone on the line? You are live on Revolutions Per Minute on WBAI. What is your name? What is your comment and or question?
Hi, how are you? My name is Greg.
How you doing?
Pretty good, thanks. I was a listener of BAI years ago, and I just kind of fell off from it because it kind of diluted to inconsequence. And I just happened to just turn the radio on to see if there was anything that would strike my interest, and heard the first two words of the host or the guest, and kind of sparked my interest. And I've been listening since, going 45 minutes. And I like what you're doing, and I like the revolutionary spirit. And I have friends and family that work for the Postal Service, and they tell me horror stories of how workers are treated. And I think you and your organizations and your collaborative associates could your presence in these institutions like the Postal Service, particularly one in Bethpage, I think it's at 288 West Grumman Road. It is a gulag. There are stories of management having makeshift room for sexual favors being granted for time offs and longer lunch hours. They could use your presence. I mean, what I'm listening is again sparking my interest in BAI, because I have not in a while listened to a program that held me riveted.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your call and for I'm very happy to hear that you've turned on the radio and you're encouraged what we have to say. That's exactly what we're trying to do here in Revolutions Per Minute, and the fact that you connected us with people in your family who are, workers who are doing key work, but in a position where they're facing, it sounds like horrors. And absolutely necessary. Sorry, Desiree, hop in.
Yeah, Jack, if I could just talk about the United States Postal Service, something I'm really passionate about.
Go right ahead.
It's one of the few federal services that we still get from the government. It's not supposed to turn a profit. It's a federal service. Right now, the Postmaster General was appointed by President Trump. His name is Louis DeJoy. President Biden cannot fire him, unfortunately. So that's what's going on. He has completely tanked the U.S. Postal Service, just cut the funding, put it basically into a death spiral. And that's why you're seeing a lot of the issues with workers' rights and the issues with quality of life for the workers, and also quality of service that, for a service that keeps America running, keeps our small businesses moving, that we really need to retain. So it's definitely a problem, and I think that across the board, these are spaces where DSA members are organizing, especially down in D.C. for the Fire DeJoy campaign. There's just so many literal fires to put out. Indeed.
And on the ground, and I mentioned again the facility in at 288 West Grumman Road. If your representatives or yourselves could at least have a conversation with a handful of these workers who are facing the guillotine, for lack of a better term, your presence would serve to liberate dozens and dozens of people who feel they have no recourse. It is horrible, the stories I hear. Horrible.
Well, we'll make sure to, keep our eyes and our ears and get our people out there if we have the resources. And I think that seems like a crucial fighting to make sure that postal workers who are union members are in working conditions that they deserve to have. And it seems like the working conditions there are horrific, and we need to
horrific indeed.
We need absolutely a society in which people do not ever have to work under those conditions. So and postal workers would be key members of any sort of movement that we're going to have to transform this country. We have a massively popular program. A Green New Deal for New York could be coming our way soon. The people, working people here in New York want that. All it's going to take is a demonstration of our power. And workers, we have people everywhere who are ready to take that fight up. We just need to unite through organization. And that's what's happening every single day as people talk to their coworkers, talk to their neighbors, and build tenants unions that we have all across the city as they join DSA. So we're going to keep our eyes and our ears on these struggles, and we keep broadcasting them out on the radio. Desiree, do you have any final words for our listeners?
At work and you needed a sign, this is your sign. Unionize your workplace. If you really feel your workplace is beyond redemption, quit your job. This is the time to take your life and make it what you want to see, because you deserve better and we all deserve better.
Well, I think that's a great way to end the show, and you've been listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast app. You'll hear from us again next week, as we'll be talking about the election results that are going to be happening all across the country, and we'll be continuing to update you on all the struggles here in New York City and across the world as people fight alongside their coworkers, their neighbors, and hit the streets to fight for a better world. This has been Jack Devine with Revolutions Per Minute.